Welcome to Chapter 3 of Module 152. And the name of our chapter is ICD-10-CM Outpatient Coding and Reporting Guidelines. So this isn't a real complicated chapter. We're just going to be talking about, just kind of the ins and outs of the ICD-10, the development, the format, things of that nature. It is chapter 2, and we're going to be covering the learning objectives, and I've already have those posted for you, so you'll know what objectives we're going to be going through. Also, you can refer to your syllabus that's loaded for you in Forms. So here we go. We're going to share our screen and get started. So chapter 3, ICD-10-CM Outpatient Coding and Reporting Guidelines. Remember, guys, that's your big purple book. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about the first listed diagnoses. I-10 guidelines state that the principal diagnosis is inpatient and the first listed diagnosis is outpatient settings. The primary reason for the encounter is what the principal diagnosis would be or the first listed diagnosis would be. For example, if a patient came in with a hernia, well, the patient has a hernia and presents with shortness of breath, what is your first listed diagnosis? It's the shortness of breath. So it's what they actually walked into the doors for. You assign ICD-10 codes for outpatient services in accordance with the ICD-10 official guidelines for coding and reporting. In the outpatient setting, the term first listed diagnosis, primary, is used instead of principal diagnosis. So let's talk a little bit about unconfirmed diagnoses. In an outpatient setting, it may take several encounters to confirm what the actual diagnosis is. So you may report signs and symptoms. For example, a patient presents with complaint of frequent heartburn. The physician prescribes Prilosec for suspected GERD with patient returning in 10 days. So you're going to report frequent heartburn. Sorry. Okay, and this is why I got tongue-tied, because GERD was the very first ICD-10 code that I actually remembered. I just always find that funny. I don't know why, and I was a cardiology coder. GERD is something that we used intermittently, but for some reason it just stuck in my head. All right, end of useless stories. Outpatient surgery. You should report the reason for the surgery as the first listed diagnosis, the reason for the encounter, even if the surgery is not performed, followed by the code to report the reason procedure not carried out, such as Z53.09, procedure not carried out due to other Guys, this word gets me every time. Contraindication. I just say other reasons. I know I shouldn't get tongue-tied with that word, but it just makes me go cross-eyed when I see it. It's contraindication. There you go, I got it. Okay, so let's read it again. So now that my tongue is untied and Miss Marcia can do it, followed by the code to report reason, procedure not carried out, such as Z5309, procedure not carried out due to other contraindication. That simply means, for example, if they get in and they start doing a gallbladder surgery and your heart rate goes through the roof and your blood pressure can't come down and you're having all these other issues, so they cannot continue the surgery. Well, you still have to code that they did the surgery, but then you have to put the Z5309 telling them that they had to cease the surgery due to a contraindication. So I hope that made sense. Z codes report circumstances other than disease or injury. Z codes are informative, may be first or additionally listed depending on circumstances. Z23 reports encounters for inoculations and vaccination. Procedure code, identifiers, administration. Okay, so let's take a look at Z99.89. What is that code? It's dependence on enabling machines and devices not elsewhere classified. There's a reason they call it crackberry. This is an obsolete joke, but there just isn't another iPhone pun that can compete with crackberry. So everybody's addicted to their cell phones, right? Z63.1, problems in relationship with your in-laws. Who would know that there is a diagnosis code for that? Okay, so now we're going to talk about our external cause index. It's located after the tabular of drugs and chemicals. External cause codes are never first listed diagnoses, and they clarify injury or adverse effects. Code terms describe the external circumstances under which an accident, injury, or act of violence occurred. External cause codes have their own index in I-10. Let's talk about observation stay. Category Z03 and Z04. Patient admitted to observation status. You report the Z code as the first listed for diagnosis stated as suspected rule-out conditions. If a diagnosis is made, report the diagnosis as the first listed. Other codes may be reported in addition to observation codes. Coexisting conditions. If a coexisting condition is present and affect the patient's care or is treated, report as coexisting condition. For example, a patient presents with SOB due to asthma. The physician prescribes a nebulizer treatment. Patient is morbidly obese, making the examination and treatment more complex. What is your first listed? It's asthma. And your coexisting condition is obesity. So let's take a look at the wording. Patient presents with shortness of breath due to what? The asthma. Why does he have the asthma? Probably because he's morbidly obese. And it makes the treatment more complex, so it's important to add that. Uncertain diagnosis. Inpatient report uncertain diagnosis as if it exists. It's going to be probable, suspected, questionable, rule out, working diagnosis, or etc. An outpatient report symptoms, signs, abnormal test results, or other reasons for the encounter. Code the condition to the highest degree of certainty, such as symptoms, signs, abnormal results, or other reasons for the encounter. Chronic diseases. Chronic conditions are treated on an ongoing basis. Report condition as many times as the patient receives care or treatment for that condition. Do not report conditions that were previously treated and no longer exist. But you can use these report history codes, Z80 through Z87, as secondary diagnosis if the condition impacts current condition or affects the treatment. Diagnostic services. Only diagnostic services provided report first reason for the service. For example, a patient presents for a routine periodic gynecological exam. Report Z01.419. No signs, symptoms, or associated diagnosis. Example, patient presents for diagnostic imaging for left breast mass. Subareolar. Report N63.42, unspecified lump in the left breast, subareolar. Later, the diagnosis could be malignant neoplasm, and then you're going to report C50.112. So you see how that kind of follows a paper trail, where you go in for a routine gynecologic exam, then you go in for an imaging of your left breast, then you're diagnosed with what you actually have, but you're going to be able to code for all of those things. So it follows the paper trail. Therapeutic services. Patient receiving only therapeutic services report the reason for the encounter. For example, an outpatient chemotherapy for right breast cancer, you're going to report Z51.11 chemo and C50.911 malignant neoplasm of the right breast. Okay, why do you report the chemo first? Well, because you're going for a therapeutic service, you're actually going for the chemotherapy. So you would report your chemotherapy first and the reason why they're having the chemotherapy. You have to pay attention to what you're doing. Therapeutic services, where you're going for chemo, chemo comes first, cancer comes second. So preoperative evaluation. First listed code is the pre-op exam. So let's look at our subcategory, Z01.81 code, Encounter for pre-procedural exam. So you have a list of those. Your 810 is pre-op cardiovascular exam. 811 is pre-op respiratory exam. 812 pre-op for lab. 818 pre-op exam, not elsewhere otherwise specified, exam before chemo. And then additionally, you can code the reason for the surgery. Also code any additional findings related to the pre-op evaluation. Pre-postoperative diagnoses. Report most definitive diagnosis. It's usually the postoperative diagnosis. So let's just talk about this question. When the report indicates a different pre and postoperative diagnosis, which would you report? You're going to report the postoperative, because sometimes they think you have one diagnosis and then they get in there to do the procedure and they find that your diagnosis may be a little bit different. So you need to pay a close attention to that. Let's talk about prenatal encounters. Routine outpatient prenatal encounters with no complications. You're going to report category Z34, supervision of routine pregnancy. For example, 19-year-old female presents for an initial prenatal exam, first pregnancy, Z34.00. Prenatal encounters for high-risk patients report as first listed, O09, supervision of a high-risk pregnancy. An example, 29-year-old first trimester female patient presents for prenatal encounter with varicose veins. Then you would use O22.01. Okay, that's the end of our slide, but not the end of what I want us to do together. So what I'm going to do, y'all give me just a second to get prepared. I only have so much desk space, and I'm going to be jiggling you around a little bit, but I want to show you something that I think is very important. So just bear with me while I'm going to call it move my furniture around a little bit. But I'm pulling out my ICD-10. Now I'm going to take my camera. You guys bear with me. I'm going to move you around a little bit so that we can kind of call it getting the best of both worlds here. Excuse my hand in the way. Here we go. Okay. So you see my, going to move you around a little bit more. Bear with me. Uh-oh. I don't know what I did. I hit. Sorry about that. Stopping the share. Oop, you guys get to see the pretty classroom. All right. Guys, one of these days I'm going to be a pro at this thing, but today is not that day. Today is not that day. All right, here we go. So you guys see my, this is month 2019. I do have a 2020, but by the time I get my books labeled the way that I want them, it's time for new ones. So this is what I do. See the side where I have tabbed here, and then the top I've tabbed here. This is my index. So if you're new to the ICD-10, then at the very beginning, let's just start. This is guidelines. You have some anatomy, some great resources here. Well, I wish I could get this to act a little bit better here. Let's see. Okay, there we go. I think that's better. Okay, so we have anatomy. And then we're going to start our index. Now, this is where my A, B, C, where my alphabet starts. So this is our index, and this is where we're going to look up if it's a cough, if it's nausea and vomiting, if it's shortness of breath. We're going to begin to code in here. Don't be nervous if you've not coded before. We'll start going through step by step of how we're gonna do that. If you have any questions, please reach out to me. Do not feel overwhelmed. But this is our index. Okay. So after our index, we were talking about, and I have not yet labeled these, but they were talking about the external causes table. Well, I'm kind of going to show you. This is our table of neoplasms, and it is blue. And I usually put, and I'm going to grab it just so you guys can see. I'm not going to write on it. I'm just going to grab some. But I like to have these labeled, and I don't know why I never got around to labeling this. But I would put a label here, and that way if I needed to go to that index, I could just use it, and I would write on it table of neoplasms. In here, we have our table of drugs and chemicals. And I'm just going to make me another little tab here. Okay, and then you heard tell of the external causes index when we were just doing the slides. The external cause of injuries index. And so I'm going to put one here for that. And so I have my indexes labeled. This is my alphabetic index for my, to be able to look at my codes. Now I have my external cause, neoplasm, and table of drugs. I have that labeled. Now I'm moving into what we call the tabular. So these are your tabular. And then I went all the way through and labeled just because to me it makes more sense. Now we just got through talking about Z codes. So what I would like to do is I'd like to turn straight over to Z codes. Okay, so when you get to Z codes, you see all this lovely green. These are your guidelines. They're going to tell you all your rules and regulations about the Z codes. So these are all your rules and regs. And then this starts your Z codes. We're going to talk about bubbling and highlighting. And for some reason, I thought I had done that. But let me pull up out my 2020 and see if maybe I did some bubbling and highlighting in my 2020. I don't think I have, but let's just see. Yes, I did. So I'm going to switch manual. Now, this is what I call bubbling and highlighting. I draw a bubble around everything that goes together, and then I make little notes. I'm just going to point you to Z01, where I said, here I wrote special exam. Then here's eye and vision, failed vision screening, hearing and ears, dental and cleaning. This is what I do in all of my manuals. I do it in my CPT manual. I do it in my ICD-10 manual, because what this forces you to do is to get in and to read and know what's there. I cannot express to you enough how important this step is. Now, we'll get more into it as we go, But Z codes are particularly, they're not difficult, but there's so many different, there's random ones. There's so much in here that can be about gynecological visits. They can be chemotherapy. They can be immunizations. They can be a routine visit. So you really need to know what's in your Z codes. So I would encourage you to go get you some labels, start labeling your ICD-10, label your indexes, get into your Z codes, and really, really, really see what's there. These manuals, I don't want to say they're not your Bible, but they're your guide. They're a wonderful, wonderful guide. So, all right, guys. Well, I hope that that wasn't too terribly bad, but I wanted to be able to show you my manual, and we'll be talking more about the bubbling and highlighting. And, you know, if you have any questions about, you know, what I do with my manual or the expectations, my only expectations is come up with a system that works for you. Make notes, highlight, label. Maybe that doesn't work for you. Maybe something totally different works for you. The most important thing is for you to find a system that helps you remember and make notes in your manual so you can actually find codes when you're having a hard time. So, or if, you know, it makes you feel comfortable. I feel comfortable when I open my manuals because I spend time in them. All right, well, I hope that you guys enjoyed. What chapter did we just do? Did we do chapter 3? Bye-bye. Let me know if you need any help.